nationally. He is knocking on the door. So, my name is Steve Marchand. If you're on Twitter and you like Yang, we may be connecting lately. Here in New Hampshire, senior advisor, Christina Snell, I think Christina's over there. She's our state director, and she is awesome. And you've seen a lot of progress over the last few weeks. We've raised more money in less than half a quarter than we raised all of the second quarter. The polling keeps moving up. Elon Musk is on board. How about that? And it turns out as people are finally getting a chance to experience Andrew Yang and his message and his campaign, he had the lowest name ID, still does, and yet is beating a lot of folks who've been getting ready to do this for a long time. And the power of the message, I think, is key to it. But he's a hell of a great guy, too. And I met him in January. We got coffee. And then I realized he's not just a 45-year-old first-generation American dad of two who likes math like me. That's a good place to start a friendship. This is a guy that can transform America at a time that we need it most. A guy told me this from that voted for Trump in 2016. He said Trump was the wrong answer to the right question. Andrew Yang is the right answer to the right question. The question, how come everybody tells us the economy is rocking when the majority of Americans feel like they're in a tough place? The answer is not immigrants, it's automation. And the answer is not going back, it is accelerating forward. The future of the country and the future president of the United States is right behind me. So I'm going to shut up and let you listen to Andrew Yang.
It's great to be back here in New Hampshire. How many of you knew that I graduated from high school here in the States? No. Yeah, I went to Phillips Secondary. They just had me back to speak a few months ago, and I was honest. I said, I haven't been back since I graduated because I didn't have a good time here. And then that comment was met with this burst of applause from the student body, and I was like, oh no. I was like, oh, didn't expect that. After I graduated from Exeter, I went to Brown University, studied economics, went to law school in New York City. Anyone here go to law school? Yeah, really? You too? Wow. I was going to say dodge a bullet for most of you. So I spent 5 unhappy months as a lawyer and left to start a business. How many of you have started an organization or business or nonprofit or cause or a webpage? So if you have your hand up, you know how hard that is, and you know how whenever anyone asks you how it's going, what do you say?
It's going great.
It's going great. No one ever wants to hear anything but it's going great. So you have to say it's going great. Well, my business did not go great. It had its mini rise and maximum fall. My parents told their friends I was still a lawyer. But I'd been bitten by the bug. I worked at another technology company for a number of years, and then I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States. During that time, I saw firsthand one of the reasons why we went through the financial crisis 10 years ago. How was the financial crisis 2008-2009 here in New Hampshire? For some people, I think you got off a little easier than some other parts of the country, but it was very, very rough in many, many parts of the country. And I thought I knew one reason why, which is that we had so many whiz kids from Exeter and Brown who headed to Wall Street and made these derivatives and fancy financial instruments. And I thought, well, if that's wrecking the economy, what would be better for the economy? And so the vision I had, smart people should build things. That's right, brother. So the vision I had was that we should have people starting businesses in places like Manchester, Providence, New Orleans, Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland. So I quit my job. I donated some money to start a new organization called Venture for America. I started calling some rich friends of mine with this question: do you love America? The smart among them asked, what does it mean if I say yes? And I said, at least $10,000. And 12 of them said, I love it. I love America for $10,000. I said, I thought you did. So we started with a couple 100,000, grew to several million, and then more. I helped create several thousand jobs around the country in 15 cities, to the point where I was honored by the Obama administration. I got to bring my wife to meet the president. My in-laws liked me for about a week. But during this time, how many of you are from here in New Hampshire? The Northeast generally? Well, that's just we're pretty much, I'm like you. Midwest? South? West Coast? So those of you had your hands up when I said Northeast. I grew up the same way. I grew up in upstate New York. I went to school in New England. So I had never been to Birmingham, New Orleans, Cleveland, St. Louis, and I was staggered by the difference between, let's say, Michigan and Manhattan, or St. Louis and San Francisco. I felt like you were traversing decades or ways of life or dimensions and not just going through time zones. But I was still stunned when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Remember that? We all remember where we were. Now, some of you likely supported Donald Trump. I saw his victory as this giant red flag for our country. That so many of our fellow Americans were desperate enough to vote in a narcissistic reality TV star as our president. And I have been doing this work around the country, helping create several thousand jobs. People were clapping me on the back. I was getting medals, awards, a movie made about us. And I said, you don't get it. I feel like I'm pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom. And the water rushing out the bottom of the bathtub led to Donald Trump becoming president. Now, if you turn on cable news, why would you think that Donald Trump's our president today? Russia.
Economic policy.
Electoral college. Fear-mongering. Emails. Hillary Clinton. Facebook. The FBI. Some mixture of these things. But the numbers tell a different story, and I'm a numbers guy. The numbers say the reason why Donald Trump is our president today is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all of the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win and did win. And what we did to those jobs, we will now do to retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, on and on through the economy. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing? Amazon, that's right. Amazon sucking up $20 billion in business a year. How much is Amazon paying in taxes? Zero. So that is the math. Amazon sucks up $20 billion, you get zero. And the most common job here in New Hampshire and around the US is retail clerk. 30% of stores and malls close. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $11 an hour. What is she going to do when her store closes? When you call a big company and you get the software that says, hello, what do? You count 0, 0, 0 and say human, human, human as fast as possible. You're like, get me a human. And then the human comes on, you're like, oh, thank goodness. In 2 or 3 years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? Yeah. It's going to be delightful, efficient. You might not even realize it's software. What's that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers right now making $14 an hour?
Lots of working welfare.
You don't need genuine artificial intelligence to do customer service jobs. You need a very sophisticated decision tree and a series of voice prompts. The software can even detect changes in your tone of voice, so it'll know you're getting irritated, and then it'll change tack. Driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states, including this one. There are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. My friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. Why do they want to make self-driving trucks so badly? For the money. $168 billion a year in cost savings if they can get rid of truck drivers. And they tell me they're 98% of the way there. Now think about that number for a second, $168 billion a year. That's an almost unbelievable amount of money. That's one reason why the smartest people in the country are working on solving that problem. They're 98% of the way there, which sounds like a lot, but 2% error rate is very high when you're talking about semi-trucks. Can you imagine like trucks just like smashing into things 2% of the time? You're like, oh, I guess that's all right. And the self-driving trucks are really bad with something called snow. Because they rely upon the markers on the highways to figure out what to do. And so when those markers get covered, then the computer gets confused. So then you think, okay, that means we're not going to have to worry about this for a while. Do you remember the first time you saw TV on your cell phone? Remember that experience? That was 3G. We're now rolling out 5G. And 5G is how they think they can get the last 2% for self-driving trucks. The plan is to equip the trucks with teleoperating software such that there will be a warehouse in Nevada, and then when the computer gets confused as to what to do with the truck, it beeps in Nevada, and then someone sitting in that warehouse in Nevada then beams into the truck and drives it like a video game. Because the truck will have cameras at the front if you beam in, you can just see out the front of the truck like you're driving it like a remote operator. So the person will beam in from Nevada, drive the truck for a little while, and then the computer will say, okay, I'm confident again, you can beam back out. What do you think the ratio is going to be between teleoperators in Nevada and the 3.5 million Americans who drive a truck for a living? 1%, 2%, 3%? What's that going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million Americans who work at truck stops, motels, diners, and retail establishments that need the truckers to get out and have a meal? Dozens of truckers protested in the Midwest a few months ago. They did something called a slow roll, which is they drove their truck slowly and then all traffic behind them slowed down too. Everyone was confused. Everyone on the highway was like, why are we all going 40 miles an hour? What were the truckers protesting? They were protesting the digital monitoring of their driving time. Because if you're a trucker, you're not allowed to drive your truck more than 14 hours a day. You have to get out and go to sleep and have a meal. And they didn't like that, so they were protesting. How do you think they're going to react when it's a robot truck that never stops that threatens their livelihood?
They're going to vote for you.
I actually am getting a lot of truckers. Only 13% of truckers are unionized, so there's not really much of a negotiation. I just want to very quickly go through the top Yang Gang supported professions. The top 5. Number 1 is software engineers. And we just got endorsed by Elon Musk last week. Number 2 is teachers. Number 3 is drivers. And then number 4 and 5 are retail and warehouse fulfillment center workers. Do you notice any themes in these top 5?
Regular people.
They're closest to the action. You know what I mean? Like when I say we're going to automate away the jobs, the software engineers are all like, oh yeah, we're doing that. They're never like, oh, it's going to be fine. You know, that's one reason why Elon endorsed me. Elon sees it more clearly than just about anyone. And it's not just Elon. Jack Dorsey, Sam Altman, Alexis Ohanian, who's better known as Serena Williams' husband. They're all Yang Gang. Because they see the future. They see what we're doing. I saw this happen. Trump wins. And I look up and say, my country does not understand what's happening to it. We're scapegoating immigrants for something immigrants have nothing to do with. This is a straight technology and automation problem. We're in the 3rd inning of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country. What experts are calling the 4th industrial revolution. When's the last time you heard a politician say the words 4th industrial revolution? Just now. I'm barely a politician. So this is what I was seeing in 2017, and my first move was not to run for president, because I'm not crazy. Really, I was like, okay, we're going through this problem. So I did what citizens would do, is I went to Washington, D.C., and I'm a pretty cool guy, so I could meet with very senior people. So I met with folks in D.C. with my facts and figures, my PowerPoint deck, and I said, look, we're going through this transformation. The American people don't know what's happening. What are we going to do about it? What do you think the folks in Washington, D.C. said to me when I asked, what are we going to do about it?
Study it.
Number 1, we cannot talk about that. Number 2, we should study that further. Number 3, the most common was, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And that sounds pretty reasonable, like we'd be against that. But I looked at the studies of what happened to the manufacturing workers that lost their jobs. What do you think the effectiveness rate was of retraining programs for those workers? 0 to 15%. We're terrible at retraining. I was at a truck stop recently, and if I went and had a clipboard and said, hey, would you like to sign up for retraining? They'd be more likely to punch me in the face than sign up. That's not a job I would want. Like, I'm here from the government. I'm here to retrain. So when I said this to the folks in Washington, I said we're terrible at retraining. You know what they said to me? I guess we'll get better at it. And one person in Washington, D.C. said something that sent me here to you all. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town. No one here in D.C. is going to do anything about this. Because this is not a town of leaders, this is a town of followers. I'm so glad I had someone with me to witness this conversation, because you would think I was making it up, right? You'd be like, no way that conversation happened. That's like movie script stuff. But it would happen. He said, this is a town of followers, not a town of leaders. And the only way we will do anything is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down our heads in D.C. And I took that as a mission. I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back with the wave. So this was 2017 when I'm meeting with the folks in DC, and I'm now here with you all as one of the 9 candidates to qualify for the fall debates. Our boss poll out just now had me tied for 5th place. We've raised $3 million in the last 6 weeks in increments of only $24 each. So my fans are even cheaper than Bernie's. No one knew it was possible, but we found them. Thank you, Gang Gang. It's a very cheap gang to join. If you donate $25, you're immediately an above average member of the gang. And if you leave, we'll never know. Kidding, no one leaves. So that's what led me to run for president. The fact that we're going through this transformation. I'm here with you all. Raise your hand. Oh my gosh, I have a mic. Wow. Does it work?
Yep.
Yes. Please. All right. So I want you to raise your hand and just signal what number presidential candidate I am that you have seen in the cycle. So this would be 1, this would be 5, this would be 7. Like how many have you seen in person?
Oh, in person?
All right, so 1, a lot of you. Let's see the highest number I see. Any 2 hands up? I got 24. Oh, look at that. You get 9, right? 24. Wow, that's authoritative. So why is it that so many presidential candidates are going to come to you all? Because you all have the future of the country in your hands. I've done the math. Do you know how many Californians each New Hampshire voter is worth? 1,000. 1,000 Californians, each of you. So look around this gathering. How many of you are there? Let's call it 120. I see 120,000 Californians. That is 3. You're a little bit spoiled. You're like, I don't know what to think of the Yang guy. I only met him that one time. But you have the future of the country in your hands. This is one of the only places where your votes can actually move us in another direction. The rest of the country looks up and they think that their votes don't matter because they see the pipes clogged full of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. They're generally correct. Most of their votes do not matter. But your votes matter. That's why I'm here. That's why the other candidates are here. We need your help to bring this vision to the rest of the country as fast as possible. So what is the vision? The first time you heard about me in this campaign, you heard something like this. There's an Asian man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a year. Remember that?
Yeah.
Nothing like the first time. And the first time you saw it, you were like, ha ha, that's a gimmick, that's a joke, that'll never go anywhere, that must not be for real. But this is a deeply American idea. It's embedded in our DNA. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country. He called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King was fighting for it. In 1967, in his book, Chaos or Community, he called it the guaranteed minimum income. And it is what he was fighting for the day he was assassinated in 1968. 1,000 economists, including Milton Friedman, endorsed it in the 60s and 70s. It was so mainstream, it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971. And 11 years later, one state actually passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? Alaska. And how do they pay for it? Oil. And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology. Technology, data, AI, software. Data, it just came out that data is now more valuable than oil. So this is real. In Alaska, they call it the oil check and they love it. We're going to call this the tech check, and we're all over it. So again, Amazon, $1 trillion tech company, paying zero in taxes, less than everyone here. How is that possible? I just want you to imagine the scene. Jeff Bezos is in his office in Seattle with his accountants. His accountants come in and be like, hey, Jeff, great news. Zero in taxes again. And then what does Jeff do? He says, thumbs up, he goes to his vault, he comes back with giant bags of money, he gives them to his accountant saying, nice job, and they drive off with the money. Yeah, he doesn't have a mustache. And then he brings up a slide of his rockets to Mars because he spends $1 billion a year trying to make rocket ships. This is all true. I don't know about the bags of money in the vault. But the $1 billion on rockets to Mars is true. So I'm going to ask you all, the Amazon accountants are just doing their job. But whose fault is it that Amazon's paying zero in taxes? Our fault. The government's fault. If we've devised a system where Amazon can pay zero in taxes, we are doing it wrong. And that is what we have to change. If we give you all, the American people, a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile, we can generate hundreds of billions of dollars very, very quickly. That's how we pay for this $1,000 freedom dividend for everyone in New Hampshire, particularly when you reflect on what you would do with the money. So I want you all to think about in 2021, after I'm president, thank you, New Hampshire, the dividends come into your hands. How are you going to spend the $1,000 a month? Car repairs, student loans, volunteering, master's degree, new businesses. How much? Bitcoin. How much of it would stay right here in New Hampshire? Most all of it. Some of it would float up to the cloud. You buy an extra toaster on Amazon. But most of it would go back into local businesses, car repairs, daycare, Little League sign-ups, volunteerism, local nonprofits. The money would flow through New Hampshire over and over again. We can build a trickle-up economy from people, families, and communities up. And unlike the trickle-down garbage that has never worked, this would work. This money in your hands would end up reinforcing all the things that you value in your communities and would give rural areas in particular a path forward, because we know rural areas are getting sucked dry right now. Young people in New Hampshire feel they have to leave, they have to move to Boston for the kinds of opportunities they want. Because we're in the midst of a winner-take-all economy that is becoming more and more extreme. It is up to the people of New Hampshire to balance it out. And the best way to balance it out is by issuing a dividend to every American citizen, because we are the owners and shareholders of the richest country in the history of the world. I'll tell you, when companies do this, and they do it all the time, Microsoft, Verizon, Coke, they issue dividends and everyone applauds them. Everyone says, great job by management. We're at the same point now as a country. This is the kind of move we have to make. So hopefully now the dividend doesn't seem as far out or dramatic. And one thing I talked to my wife about, she says, wait a minute, this was mainstream in the 60s and 70s. We just passed Medicare, we just passed Social Security, we were looking at guaranteeing a certain amount of income for every family. And then now in 2019, it takes like the far out futurist Asian man to make the case. So my wife's like, what the heck happened in those 50 years? And what happened in those 50 years is we got brainwashed into thinking that economic value and human value are the same thing. We got brainwashed into thinking that if you don't have any economic value, then you're worthless. And that if you're a trucker and we're going to automate your jobs, we're going to somehow teach you how to code, even though that makes 0 sense on the face of it. So we have to get our heads up and say, we are the owners, we are the shareholders, and the economy has to work for us, not the other way around. How many of you were excited about GDP when you woke up this morning? You were like, oh, it's going to go up, and I'm going to make a big contribution. My wife is at home right now with our 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. What is her work calculated at the GDP every day? Zero. What is the market value of her work at? And we know that's nonsense. We know her work is among the most challenging and vital in our society. I spent a couple days off the trail taking care of my kids. You know what I said after 2 days? Get me back on the trail. And any parent knows what I'm talking about. It is so hard. And we're valuing it at 0. We know women do the vast majority of the unrecognized and uncompensated work in our society. We have to balance that out too. So if GDP, right now GDP is at record highs, also at record highs. Stress, anxiety, suicides, drug overdoses. It has gotten so bad that America's life expectancy as a country has declined for the last 3 years in a row. You all want to know the last time America's life expectancy declined 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918. Global pandemic, killed millions, 100 years ago. We're in Spanish flu territory because suicides and drug overdoses have both overtaken vehicle deaths as cause of death in the United States. So what good is record high GDP if our people are struggling and suffering? Self-driving cars and trucks will be great for GDP. They're going to be terrible for all the people that used to drive those vehicles for a living and the people who work in the retail stores. So if GDP is a bad set of measurements, what would actually get you excited if I said this got better in New Hampshire?
Life expectancy.
Health and life expectancy. Mental health and freedom from substance abuse.
Ability to pay for basic necessities.
Affordability and income. Birth rates. Whether we're doing better than our parents. right now, the odds of you doing better than your parents are down to 50% if you're born in the 90s, down from 93% if you were born in the 40s. So the American dream is declining very, very fast. All this stuff you fear to be true is true. It is. It's probably worse than you think. As someone who's now been around the block, all over the place, I've been to the Silicon Valley labs, I've been in DC, I've been in New York on Wall Street, I've been all over the country. It's worse than you think. Because you think the machines that are supposed to help the American people, they don't care about you. So these are the measurements that would actually tell us how we're doing. How about clean air and clean water? You won't believe this, but we can actually measure our economic progress in these ways, and we have to do it. Because if we follow GDP, we're just going to keep following it off a cliff. How many of you have run a business or organization? Imagine having the wrong measurements. How's that organization going to do over time? It's going to do terribly. We need the right measurements. And it will be my joy as your president to go down the street to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, GDP, 100 years old, really out of date. Even the inventor of GDP said this. He said, GDP is a terrible measurement of national well-being. We should never use that. He said that 100 years ago. And now we're following GDP off a cliff. So I'm going to update it to include mental health, freedom from substance abuse, affordability, life expectancy, childhood success rates. I'm going to turn this into the new GDP, the American scorecard. And I'm going to present this to you all. In a PowerPoint deck. I'm going to be the first person to use PowerPoint. And tell you how we're doing, and then update you on the stats, and we can see the progress. Then we can get excited and we can see the real stats. Because right now we're revolving our economic discussions around GDP, stock market prices, and headline unemployment rate. And those three stats are terrible. They're all way off base. And if you have the wrong measurements, you're going to go the wrong direction. So this is the vision we need you all to take to the rest of the country, of a human-centered economy, a trickle-up economy that works for us. That works so that Americans don't feel they have to move someplace else to have a good life. Because that's not the way it should be in the United States of America. And that is the subtext of a lot of the conversations that are out there in the world. That if your community is losing vitality, that's your fault, that's your community's fault, and you should move. That is the subtext of so much of what's going on, because we've all been brainwashed into thinking that we are inputs into this giant capital efficiency machine. And if we keep up with that conception, we're going to lose on an historic, catastrophic scale. Because technology is going to zero out not just the truck drivers or the retail workers, it's going to zero out the accountants, the radiologists, the pharmacists. It's going to keep on going. So we have to get Americans' heads up, and it's up to you, the people in New Hampshire.